Sign her over to me and walk away, the old stonecutter told the trader. The mallet was in my hand when Prout rode in. I heard the horse before I saw it, hooves on the dry creek bed south of the yard, that particular hollow knock that means a shod animal moving fast on stone, and I didn't look up. I was chasing a line through a piece of sandstone the color of old bone, trying to get the chisel seated right before the light shifted. You get maybe an hour of useful angle on a west-facing block in late afternoon, and I'd already lost 20 minutes fighting a seam I hadn't expected. So I kept my eyes on the work. It was the second horse that made me turn. 2 animals, not one, and the second one was being led. Prout came across the flat with his hat pushed back and his belly leading and a rope in his hand. On the other end of that rope was a sorrel mare with a woman on it. She was sitting straight. I noticed that first. A woman being led on a rope like a pack mule, and she was sitting straight as a fence post, chin level, eyes somewhere past me on the hills. I set the mallet down on the block. My name is Calhoun, Elias Calhoun. I've worked stone in the Burnt Creek Valley for going on 22 years, and before that I worked it in 2 other places I don't talk about. People around here call me the Stonecutter, which is accurate enough. I cut stone. I set stone. I build things meant to last, foundations, cisterns, fireplace surrounds, grave markers, the occasional bridge footing when the county decides it has money. I don't talk much. I don't have to. The work talks. I was 58 years old that September. I want you to know that because it matters. A younger man might have done what I did for different reasons, or in a different way. At 58, you don't move fast and you don't speak without thinking, and you have a fairly clear picture of what you are and what you're not. I wasn't anybody's hero. I wasn't looking for a woman. I wasn't looking for trouble. I had 4 contracts lined up through October, and a good block of limestone coming down from Harker's quarry on Thursday, and I was behind on a grave marker for the Aldrich family that had already been delayed twice. I was not looking for any of this. But Prout came across my flat with a woman on a rope, and I set down the mallet. He pulled up about 30 feet out. He was a big man, Prout, the kind of big that comes from eating well and working little. He ran the dry goods in Calhoun Flat, which was not named after me, I should say. It was named after a completely different Calhoun who died of a snakebite 40 years ago. And he had his fingers in about 6 other things that he never talked about directly but that everyone understood. He lent money. He held paper. He was the kind of man who knew exactly what he was owed and had a very flexible idea of how to collect it. He smiled at me. He had a good smile. That was the thing about Prout. He had a good smile and bad eyes, and most people looked at the smile. I looked at the eyes. "Calhoun," he said, "heard you might be in the market." "For what?" I said. I didn't make it a question. He gestured with the rope, not at the woman past her like she was a fence post. Clara Hess, Widow Hess technically, since her husband walked into a rattler 5 months back. She's got a quarter section up near the Badwater draw, decent water rights, and a debt to me of $460 that she can't pay. He pulled out a folded paper from his coat. Got her signature right here, giving me authority to act as her agent in matters of the property. Figured you might want the water rights. Talked to 3 other men about the land. Thought I'd come to you first. He smiled again. I looked at the woman. She was looking at the hills. Her hands were loose on the saddle horn. She wasn't pulling against the rope, wasn't fighting it. But her jaw was set in a way that told me she'd already fought every fight available to her and was past the point where fighting showed on her face. She was maybe 32, 33. Brown hair gone dry in the sun. A calico dress that had been washed so many times the blue had mostly left it. Her boots were cracked at the left heel. I noticed the boot because it was the kind of thing you notice when you've been poor yourself, when your eye goes to things that are wearing out. "Get off your horse," I said to Prout. He blinked. "I'm not here to." "Get off your horse and come stand in front of me." There was a silence, a long one, a crow somewhere in the cottonwoods. The light doing what it does on sandstone in late afternoon, going from gold to copper. Prout looked at me and I looked back, and I didn't say anything else because I'd already said what needed saying. He got off his horse. He came and stood in front of me. I'm not a tall man. Prout had 4 inches and 40 pounds on me, easy. But I've been setting stone since I was 17 years old, and my hands look like something quarried rather than born. And I've been told that when I'm not smiling, I have a face that suggests I've seen considerably worse than whatever is currently in front of me. I don't know if that's true. I only have the one face. That paper, I said, let me see it. He hesitated, then handed it over. I read it. I read it slowly because I read everything slowly, and because the afternoon light was going. It said what he said it said. Clara Hess, widow of Thomas Hess, authorizing one Gerald Prout to act as agent in the settlement of debts related to property held in her name. Signed. Her signature was small and careful. The kind of signature a person makes when someone is watching them make it. She signed this in your store, I said. He said yes. Who else was there? My clerk, Dale. Dale Prout, I said, your nephew. He said that was correct. I folded the paper and held it. He reached for it and I put it in my shirt pocket. He didn't say anything. He was recalculating. What's the 460 for? I said. He started talking. I let him talk. It was the usual kind of talk: seed credit, provisions credit, some loan he'd extended on the property after Thomas Hess died, some interest that had compounded in a way that Prout could explain clearly and that I would have bet money a judge in this county would have found questionable. He talked for a while. I watched him. When he was done, I said, "What exactly were you going to do with her?" "The land." "I told you." "I'm not talking about the land. I'm talking about her. Where was she going to go?" He adjusted his hat. "That's not really my Prout." He stopped. "Where was she going to go?" I said again. He looked past me at the hills the way she had. "I imagined she'd find a situation. Woman with her capacity. She's a hard worker." There it was. I've heard a lot of things said in a lot of ways in 58 years. Some of them I've let go because it wasn't my place or my business or my fight. This one landed different. Not because of what he said, I'd heard worse, but because of how he said it. Woman with her capacity. Said the way you talk about a mule you're selling to a mine. I looked at her. She was still looking at the hills. Her jaw was still set. She'd heard it too. She'd probably heard it more than once by now. I said, "Sign her over to me and walk away." He stared at me. "The debt," I said. "The paper. Whatever arrangement you've got in your head. I'll pay the 460 and you'll sign every piece of paper back to her, and you'll ride out of here and not come back." The silence this time was a different kind. "You don't have 400 and—" "I have it," I said. "You want to debate that?" He looked at my hands. People look at my hands when they're trying to decide something about me. They're not wrong to. Hands tell you things. "The water rights," he said slowly. "You want the water rights." "No," I said. "I want you gone, that's all." He thought about it for a while. "Not about the ethics. Men like Prout don't think about ethics. Not in the way you and I mean." He was thinking about math. What he'd get from me versus what he'd get from selling the land to someone else, minus the trouble of dealing with a woman who was not going to make any of this easy for him, minus the trouble of dealing with me. I watched him do the math. "Cash," he said. "Come back Thursday. I've got money coming in Thursday." He looked at the woman, then back at me. "You're sure about this, Calhoun?" "Prout," I said, "take your rope off her horse and go." He untied the rope from the sorrel's halter. He coiled it up slow, the way a man does when he wants you to see he's in no hurry even when he is. He got on his horse. He looked at me one more time with those eyes of his, and I held still, and eventually he rode out the way he'd come, hooves on the dry creek bed, hollow on the stone, going away. I stood there until I couldn't hear the horse any more. Then I turned around. She was looking at me now. Not with gratitude. I want to be careful about that. It wasn't gratitude, what was on her face. It was something more careful than that. Something measuring. She'd been handled by people who meant to help her before, and she wasn't going to give away what she thought until she'd had a better look at what she was dealing with. I respected that. I'm Elias Calhoun, I said. I cut stone. I'm not going to do anything to you. You can camp here tonight if you need to, or you can ride wherever you're going. It's your horse. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Where's the water?" I showed her the well. She got down off the horse without help. I noticed she'd been watching for whether I'd reach for her arm, watching to see if I was that kind of man, and she drew water for herself and for the horse. The horse drank for a long time. She kept a hand on its neck while it drank, not petting it exactly, just present. Contact. The way a person touches something they've been holding on to. Thomas named her Birch, she said. The horse, I couldn't think of a different name. Birch is a fine name for a horse, I said. She didn't say anything else for a while, and neither did I. I went back to the sandstone block and packed my tools. The light was gone anyway. I'd lost the angle an hour ago. I cleaned the chisel heads and wrapped them in the oilcloth the way I do every evening, and set them in the box and latched the box and set it inside the shed. Then I went in and built a fire and put a pot on. She came in about 40 minutes later. She stood in the doorway until I looked at her. "I'd like to know what Thursday means," she said. "It means Prout comes back and I give him the money and he signs everything over to you. Your land, your water rights, all of it. In your name." She looked at the fire, and then it's yours, I said. "That's all, it's yours." She was quiet. The fire made sounds. Outside, Birch shifted and the lead rope creaked. "I don't understand what you're getting out of this," she said. "I'm getting Prout gone," I said. "That's not." "Clara," I said, and then I stopped because I'd used her name without asking, and that wasn't right. "Mrs. Hess, forgive me." She shook her head. "Clara is fine." She looked at me straight. "But that's not a full answer." No, it wasn't. I didn't have a full answer. Or maybe I had one and didn't know how to say it without it coming out wrong. How do you tell a woman you don't know that you watched her sitting straight on that horse with a rope on her halter, and something in you that had been quiet for a long time woke up and said enough? Not because of her. Not exactly. Because of what it was. Because of what it was. I'd been handled like property once. Long time ago, different kind of handling, different kind of place. I don't talk about it. But I know what it looks like in a person's face when they've gone past the fighting because the fighting isn't working. I know what it looks like when someone is holding onto the only dignity available to them, which is their posture. I'd recognized it. I didn't say any of that. I said, "Prout is the kind of man who will find another angle if you don't close every door on him. You can't fight paper with nothing. I can close the door." She thought about that. "And you expect nothing back." "I expect you to let me help you, and that's all." The fire, Birch outside. A coyote somewhere in the dark, starting and stopping. She said, "All right." She slept in the shed that night, which I'd cleared out the front half of years ago in case I ever had a hand staying over. I brought her blankets, and she took them without ceremony. I told her the door latched from the inside, and she nodded. I went back to the house and sat in the chair by the fire and thought about what I'd just done. $460 was most of what I had coming Thursday from the Aldrich estate job. 2 months of stonework on a family mausoleum, the biggest commission I'd had in years. I'd been planning on banking it. I'd been planning on a lot of things. I sat there and I didn't feel afraid of the decision exactly. I felt the weight of it. There's a difference. When you set a stone wrong, when you put it in the wall and you know before the mortar cures that it's not sitting the way it should, you don't panic. You feel the wrongness and you understand the work it'll take to set it right. This wasn't wrong, but it was heavy and I felt the weight. I slept. In the morning she was up before me. I heard the well handle through the bedroom window while it was still gray-dark, and I lay there listening to the sound of her drawing water and thought, she's used to this. She's used to being up before light and doing the thing that needs doing. I'd assumed she might sleep late, that she'd be exhausted from whatever the days before this had been. But no, she was up before me. I got up and built the fire and put coffee on. She came in when the smell reached the shed, I think. Stood in the doorway again in that same way, checking the room before she entered it. I poured her a cup. She sat across the table from me and we both drank without talking. After a while she said, "What are you working on?" I told her about the Aldrich marker. She asked what kind of stone. I told her Indiana limestone, which is a lie. It was actually Texas quarried sandstone that old man Aldrich's son had specifically wanted because his father had come from somewhere in the Panhandle, and the limestone had been an accommodation, but the sandstone was what the son wanted, but I was testing something. I wanted to see if she'd nod and let it go or if she'd push. She said, "You don't use limestone here. This whole valley is sandstone." I looked at her. "Thomas and I dug the foundation of our place," she said, 3 feet down, solid sandstone shelf. He said whoever built here first must have known something. "Your husband was right," I said. "Whoever built here first knew quite a lot." She drank her coffee. "Who built here first?" "Navajo," I said. "Maybe earlier. There are hand marks on the canyon walls 2 miles north. Whoever they were, they understood this stone." She thought about that. "Do you?" "I'm still learning it," I said. That was the most I'd talked to anyone in about 6 weeks, and I was aware of it. I'm not a man who needs conversation. I've spent winters where the only voice I heard was my own, and that was fine. But there was something about her, about the way she asked a question and then actually waited for the answer, the way she didn't fill the silence with sound just to fill it, that made talking feel like something other than work. She helped me that day. I didn't ask her to. She came out to the yard mid-morning while I was squaring a section of the sandstone block, watched for a while from a distance, and then walked over and said, "What do you need?" I looked at her. "I'm not going to sit in your shed," she said. "I'm not built for sitting." I handed her the chalk line. She had strong hands. Not a stonecutter's hands, she didn't have the callous patterns, but a working woman's hands. The knuckle joints enlarged a little, the skin thickened at the palm. She held the chalk line steady while I snapped it, and she did it right the first time without me explaining twice, which is not as common as you'd think. We worked until noon, and then I made food and we ate, and then we worked until the light failed. She didn't talk much while we worked. Neither did I. That suited us both, I think. At dinner she said, "I want to pay you back." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to. I'm not a charity case, Mr. Calhoun." "Elias." She looked at me. "Elias, I'm not a charity case." "No," I said, "you're not." "Then I want terms. When I get the land back, if I get the land back, I'll pay you back from the first season. The water rights on my quarter section feed 3 other properties. I've been letting them use it since Thomas died because I didn't have the energy to deal with collecting. I'll collect. By spring I can have 200 of it back to you." "You don't." "Terms," she said, "or I ride back into town and figure out another way." I looked at her. She held still and let me look. "All right," I said, "terms." She nodded. Something in her shoulders went down a little, not a lot, just a small release, like a rope going from taut to held. Thursday came. Prout rode in at noon with his nephew Dale, and a man I didn't know. I'd been expecting him to bring somebody. He was the kind of man who liked witnesses when money changed hands, or who liked the look of numbers. I'd brought Tomas Reyes, who ran the feed store and was the closest thing Burnt Creek had to a notary, and who could be counted on to keep his mouth shut unless someone asked him a direct question. Clara stood beside me when Prout rode up. She'd done that on her own. I hadn't asked her to stand there. I'd suggested she might want to wait inside, and she'd looked at me in a way that made clear she was done waiting inside for things to be decided about her. So she stood beside me. Prout looked at her, then at me, and his smile went a little stiff at the edges. He'd had 4 days to think about this, and he'd decided something. I could see it in the way he sat the horse, a little too easy, a little too comfortable. He'd found a way to make this work for him. He got down. He handed me papers. I read them. He watched me read them. Clara stood still. The papers were not what we'd agreed. The debt was settled, but there was a new lien, something about back taxes on the property that Prout claimed he'd cleared on her behalf, and which now created a separate obligation. $300. Tomas Reyes read it, and his expression went careful and still, which told me what I needed to know. I looked up at Prout. "No," I said. "That's illegal." "No, you'll hand over the papers we agreed on. Clean. Her name, her property, no liens, no obligations. You'll do it right now in front of Tomas." Prout smiled. "I don't think you understand the Gerald." It was the first time I'd used his Christian name. He stopped. "I understand exactly," I said. "You ran this same thing on the Hector Vega property 3 years ago. You ran it on the old Fenn widow before that. I've been watching you work this valley for a long time, and I am done watching." I folded the paper and handed it back to him. "The real papers, the ones without your additions. You have them, or you'd have never ridden out here." The silence was the kind that has weather in it. His 2 men shifted. Tomas Reyes looked at a spot on the horizon. Clara stood still. Prout looked at me for a long time. Then he reached inside his coat and brought out a second set of papers. "The right ones." Tomas read them over. Clara read them. I read them. They were clean: her name, her land, her water rights. No liens, debt settled. I counted out $460 in cash. I'd gotten it from the Aldrich estate office in town 2 days earlier. I'd ridden in early and gotten it, and ridden back and not told Clara, because she'd have argued with me about the amount again. Prout took the money. He counted it. He gave the papers to Tomas, who countersigned as witness. Tomas gave the papers to Clara. She held them in both hands. Prout looked at me one more time. That calculation was still running behind his eyes. I let him look. Then he got on his horse and rode out, and Dale and the other man followed, and I stood there with Tomas and Clara, and the sound of hooves on the dry creek bed going away. Tomas said, "I'll file a copy at the county seat." "I'd appreciate it," I said. He rode out, and then it was just us. Clara looked down at the papers in her hands. She read them again, slowly, the way I read things. She turned the pages. She found her name on the last page and looked at it for a moment. Then she folded the papers carefully and put them inside her dress, close to her chest, and she breathed. That was all, just that, a long, slow breath. I went back to the sandstone block. She stayed another 3 days. I didn't ask her to, and I didn't ask her not to. She was there, and she helped, and we worked, and we ate, and in the evenings we talked more than I'd expected, more than I usually do. She told me about Thomas. Not the death, not right away, but who he was, that he'd been a carpenter before they came west, that he'd built the frame of their house himself, and it had been good work, solid work, but that he'd had a weakness in his chest since he was young, and the cold and the dust of the first winter had done something permanent to him. She said he'd known, the last year, that the rattlesnake had less to do with it than it seemed. I listened. She asked about me. I told her a little, the years in the territories before Burnt Creek, the trade I'd learned from an old man in New Mexico who'd learned it from his father who'd been brought from Ireland in 1847. The way Stone teaches you things about patience that nothing else does, how you can't rush it, how the work sets the schedule, not you. She said, "You must have been lonely." I thought about that. "I was used to it," I said. "That's not the same thing." No, it wasn't. On the 3rd evening she said she was going home in the morning. She said it quietly, without announcement, just an item of information passed across the supper table. I said all right. She asked if she could take 2 of the cedar fence posts stacked by the shed. She needed to repair a section of corral before winter, and I said of course, and she thanked me. In the morning she loaded the posts across birch and tied them and went through her saddlebag and checked everything twice. I stood at the edge of the yard and watched. She came over and held out her hand. Not the papers, she kept those. Her hand to shake. I took it. "The water rights," she said. "I meant what I said about the terms." "I know you did." She looked at me. She didn't let go of my hand right away. "You didn't have to do any of this." "No," I said. "Most men in your position would have taken Prute's offer, bought the water rights, let things go the way they were going." "Most men," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, and it was the kind of looking that doesn't require words and doesn't fill silences, just sees. The way she'd been looking at the hills that first day, except this time the hills were me. I held still and let her look, the same way I'd let Prute look, but it felt completely different. Prute was calculating. She was seeing. "I'll be back in the spring," she said. Then she got on Birch and rode north toward Badwater Draw, and I stood at the edge of the yard until the dust settled back down. I went and picked up my mallet. I worked the rest of that day with something settled in me that hadn't been settled before. Not happy, I don't know if that's the right word. Solid. The way a foundation feels when you've checked the corners and the levels true and the mortar's cured all the way through and you know it's not going anywhere. That kind of solid. She came back in October. Not in spring, she said spring, but she came in October, about 6 weeks later, on a cold day with clouds moving fast from the north. She rode in with a man I didn't know, and I came out of the shed not knowing what to expect, and she said, "This is my cousin Reed. He's been working my place since September. I want him to meet you." She'd gone home and gotten her cousin and gotten back to work. The cousin was a young man, 25 or so, quiet in the right way. We shook hands. He looked at my hands and then at the work in the yard and asked a few questions about stone, real questions, not polite ones. I answered them. Clara stood slightly back and watched us talk, and I caught a look on her face I hadn't seen before, something satisfied in a private way. They stayed 2 nights. Reed slept in the shed, I'd gotten another blanket, and Clara slept in the house, which I'd offered and which she'd taken without ceremony, the way she did everything. The second evening we sat outside after supper because the cold had gone out of the air for an hour and the sky was doing something worth watching. She said, "Reed can handle winter. He's done it before. I want to come here through the cold months and work." I looked at her. "I can keep books," she said. "I know you've got contracts. I saw the ledger in the shed and I'm not going to pretend I didn't look at it. You've got 3 accounts with nothing written in the payment column. I can do the letters and chase what's owed and keep the records straight. That can count toward the debt. Clara. And I can cook. I saw what you eat. There's nothing wrong with what Elias, she looked at me sideways. There's beans in that pot that I believe have been there since September. I thought about arguing. I thought about it for a while. "All right," I said. She came in November. She brought a box of her things and her cousin's old rifle that she could shoot better than most men I knew, and a cast iron skillet that she said was hers from before she married Thomas, and that she was never letting go of. She put the skillet on my stove and it has not moved since. The winter was hard. January was the kind of cold where the animals go quiet because noise takes energy and energy is survival. And we had 3 weeks where the temperature didn't get above 15, and the creek froze solid, and I had to break ice at the well every morning before she woke up so she'd have water. I went out in the dark at 5 in the morning with the pick and broke it. I don't know if she knew. She never said. But she started leaving coffee in the pot at that hour and it was always hot. That was the kind of thing that happened that winter. She found the contracts and wrote the letters, and she was better at it than I would have been. Not because she was smarter. I don't know if she was smarter, but because she had a way of putting things on paper that sounded both firm and reasonable, and people paid. 2 accounts that had been sitting unpaid for 5 months paid within a week of her letters going out. A third tried to argue, and she wrote a second letter that I read over her shoulder, and that I decided I would not want to receive myself. I told her so. Good, she said, and sealed the envelope. In February, there was a bad week. A contractor named Briggs, who had promised me a foundation job for the spring, came out to the yard with another man, a builder from out of the valley, and made it plain that the job was going to the other man, because the other man had agreed to a price I hadn't been asked to match. He did it in front of Clara, which I thought was deliberate. He was the kind of man who thought watching a woman present for bad news was a form of leverage on the man. I listened to him say it. I said I understood. He left. Clara watched him ride out. She said nothing until the hooves were off the flat. Then she said, "Briggs has a brother-in-law who's the county assessor." I know. Does the county assessor know that Briggs has been running the same foundation specifications on 4 jobs in the last 2 years, and that 2 of those foundations are cracking? I looked at her. She looked back. Does he know that? I don't know what the county assessor knows, I said carefully. Might be worth finding out. She found out. She didn't do it through the assessor. She did it through the assessor's wife, who was friendly with the woman who bought eggs from Clara's nearest neighbor, who had been present when Briggs's wife complained loudly about the foundation cracks that Briggs had promised to fix and hadn't. A chain of information that I could not have assembled in 6 months, Clara assembled in 11 days. She didn't use it as a threat. She just wrote a letter to the assessor's office, formal, plain, informational, noting some concerns about specifications on certain recent construction in the valley, and suggesting that someone with appropriate authority might want to take a look. Briggs came back in March and offered me the job at a better number than he'd originally promised. I said I'd think about it. Clara said he'll take it. I looked at her. She looked at Briggs. He'll take it 30 days net. Briggs said 30 days net was fine. I built the foundation. It did not crack. April came and the cold let go and the light came back in the long way it does, at an angle, the shadows running long in the morning, and the colors coming up out of the stone that you can't see in winter. There's a particular quality in April sandstone. The iron in it warms up and brings up orange in a way that looks like the stone is lit from inside. I've never gotten tired of it. I was working one morning on a detail piece for the Aldrich marker. I'd been back to it, refining, and I heard her behind me and didn't turn around because I was in the middle of something. She stood there for a while. I could hear her there, the way you learn to hear a person's presence when you've been in close quarters with them all winter. Then she said, "I want to show you something." She led me north past the shed, up the rise behind the property to where the land flattens out toward the mesa. I'd been up there 100 times. It was good ground, sandstone shelf 10 inches down, solid drainage, good aspect. I'd thought about extending the yard up that way but never had. She stopped and turned around and looked back at the flat, and the house, and the shed, and the road south. "There," she said. I looked. "Another building," she said. "Something permanent, right here." She turned to me. "I'll do the books. Reed can work the land. You build and I'll keep the accounts and we'll run it as one thing instead of 2. I didn't say anything. "I talked to Reed," she said. "He's willing. He likes this place." She paused. "I like this place, Clara." "And I like you," she said, plain as weather. "I like the way you work, and I like the way you don't say things you don't mean, and I like that you don't ask me to be less than I am. I know this isn't, I know this is forward. I know that." She looked at the horizon for a moment. "But I've been forward since I was 12, and I'm not going to change that now." I stood there on the rise with the April light coming at that angle and the valley below, and the work I'd been doing for 22 years all around me, and her standing there waiting for what I'd say. She wasn't asking me to rescue her. I want to make that clear because it matters. She'd rescued herself mostly, or she was in the process of it. She was asking me to build something. Which is the thing I know how to do, building. I looked at the ground where she'd been standing. It was good ground. The way I said solid shelf, good drainage. You could set a foundation there that would last 100 years. I'll need to come up here in different light, I said. Check the corners, see how it drains when we get rain. She looked at me. I'll need to know the footprint you're thinking, I said. What rooms, how many, whether you want a cellar. Her face did something quiet. Not a smile exactly, or not only a smile. It was the expression of someone who has been holding their breath and has decided they can breathe. Cellar, she said. Definitely a cellar. Thomas always said we should have had a cellar. Thomas was right, I said. We walked back down. That evening after supper she was at the table with the ledger and I was sharpening chisels, which is a job that takes time and focus and keeps your hands busy, and she was working on something with the accounts, and she had a pencil behind one ear and her hair was loose on one side, and she was frowning at a column of numbers. The lamp was on between us. I don't have many pictures in my head from that winter. I don't mean pictures on a wall, I mean the kind that stay. Most of life you live through without holding it. But that picture I held. The lamplight and the pencil and the frown and the loose hair and the way her hand moved across the page is certain, not tentative, the hand of someone who knows what she's doing. I was 58 years old and I had worked stone alone for a very long time, and I had been used to that, and had told myself I was used to it. And sitting across from Clara Hess with her pencil behind her ear and the lamp between us, I understood the difference between being used to something and being all right with it. Not the same thing. She'd said that to me in September the first week. I hadn't forgotten it. You're staring, she said without looking up. I am, I said. She looked up. She looked at me for a moment the way she did, seeing rather than looking. Then she went back to her column. 42 more, she said. More what? Dollars toward the 460. She made a mark in the ledger. I told you I'd pay it back. I know you did. I meant it. I know you meant it, I said. She glanced at me again, brief, and there was something in it, wry and warm both at once, that I can't describe except to say it was the look of someone who sees you, not the you that you carry out in public, the actual one. I went back to sharpening. Outside, Birch was in the small corral I'd built in November, and the coyotes were going in the dark to the east, and the April night was cold but not the February kind, the kind with give in it, the kind that knows what's coming. I could hear the creek running. It had been frozen for 3 months and now it was running again, and that sound, water moving over sandstone in the dark, is one of the sounds I have always trusted. In the morning I went up the rise early, before she was awake. I took my chalk line and my level, and I walked the ground in the gray light, and I measured it, and I looked at how the water had run when we'd gotten rain in March, and I crouched down and put my hand flat on the sandstone shelf and held it there. Good stone, solid, the kind that holds. I thought about the walls I'd put up in my life, the ones that lasted and the ones that didn't, the ones that cracked because the ground moved or the foundation was wrong or the work was rushed. I've taken down walls I built. That's part of the work too, knowing when something isn't right and taking it back to the ground and starting over. But when it's right, when the stone is right and the corner is true and the courses are level, and you've set the foundation deep enough that no frost can heave it, there's nothing steadier. There's nothing in the world built by human hands that stands the way a well-laid stone wall stands. I measured the footprint. I wrote the numbers down. I came back down in the full light with the level under my arm, and she was at the well with her hair up, and she looked over when she heard my boots on the ground. Well, she said. It'll take most of the summer, I said. I'll need to bring Reed in on the heavy courses. She waited. 2 rooms and a cellar to start, I said. We can add on. She looked at me. Then she went back to drawing water, and the rope played out over the wheel and the bucket went down into the dark. And when she pulled it up and the water came up cold and bright in the morning light, she poured it slow and careful and did not spill any of it. We can add on, she said, like she was testing the sound of it. We can add on, I said. And that was that. I broke ground in May on a Tuesday, when the frost was finally out of the soil all the way down to the shelf. I set the corner stones myself, the 4 of them, one at each corner of the footprint, deep in the ground on beds of poured sand so the weight would distribute. I set them level, and I set them true, and I set them so that everything that came after would have something solid to stand on. Clara watched me set the first one. She stood at the edge of the site with her arms crossed, not to keep warm, the day was mild, but the way she crossed her arms when she was thinking. Reed was there too, off to the side, but I was aware of her. I got the stone in the ground and got my level on it and read it, and it was true. And I looked up at her, and she was looking at the stone in the ground, and her expression was the same as when she'd first breathed after getting the papers. Just that. Just a breath. I picked up the mallet and went to the second corner. This is what I have to tell you. This is the thing. I set stone for a living. I've been setting it since I was 17 years old, and I will likely set it until I can't, and then someone else will set it after me. It is not a complicated thing, what I do. You find the good stone. You work it until it's true. You set it on a foundation that can carry it. You build the wall one course at a time, and you don't rush it, and you don't let the work get ahead of the foundation. When I was 58 years old, a man came across my flat with a woman on a rope. And I set down my mallet. I'm not telling you I'm a good man. I'm telling you what I did. I put myself between her and what was happening to her because something in me that I'd kept quiet for a long time looked at her sitting straight on that horse and said enough. And she turned out to be a woman who didn't need me to save her. She needed me to close the door on Prout and hand her back what was hers, and then get out of the way while she did the rest. Which I did. And she came back. Not because I'd saved her, because she'd looked at me the way she looked at things, straight, without hurry, taking the true measure, and she'd decided I was worth her time. That is not a small thing. That is not a small thing at all. To be seen by a woman like that, clear-eyed and willing, after years of being nobody anybody thought much about, that's the thing. That's the whole of it. We built the 2 rooms and the cellar through the summer. Reed turned out to be a natural at stonework, which I hadn't expected. He had good hands and better instincts, and he took correction without sulking, which is rarer than it should be. By October we had walls and a roof, and a cellar that could hold 3 winters of provisions without breaking a sweat. Clara moved her things from the shed to the new rooms. She brought the cast iron skillet last. She set it on the new stove, and she stood in the new kitchen, and she looked at the walls and the ceiling and the window I'd cut facing east for the morning light, because she'd told me she liked morning light, and she didn't say anything. She put her hand on the wall, the way she put her hand on Birch's neck at the well that first day, just present, just contact, and she held it there. Then she turned around and looked at me standing in the doorway. She said, "Come in." I came in. I'm 63 now. That's 5 years on from the September when Prout rode in with a rope on her mare. We built 2 more rooms onto the north side the following summer and put in a real root cellar the summer after that. Reed married a woman from the Ray's family, Tomas's niece, and they took over Clara's quarter section and are working it well. The water rights are sorted out, and the accounts on both places run clean, and she does the books for 3 other outfits in the valley now, because word got out that she was good at it. I'm still cutting stone. I'll cut it until I can't. Most mornings I'm up before light to break ice or just to be up, the way I've always been, and I come in and there's coffee in the pot, always hot, and she's at the table with the lamp on and the ledger open, or sometimes just sitting with her cup. And we don't talk much sometimes. We've never needed to. But we're there, and the lamp is on, and the stone walls are 16 inches thick, and they hold the cold out in January and the heat out in July, and they will be standing long after either of us is here to stand in them. I built them solid. That's what I know how to do.